Hi, it's the Imperfect Gardener here, and I want to talk about how I plan my garden. I take pictures from previous years of my garden. For example, here's this one right here. Step one is knowing what you've done in the past. I'm going to zoom in on this a little. This is just a picture I took one year when I first put things in, and then I wrote down what I had planted that year in each spot. I can pull that out now and say, okay, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, this is where things were. I have other pictures that are online that I have saved digitally, and I can look at those and see where I've planted each thing each year, so that when it's time to plant this year, I can make sure that I'm not planting my crops in the same place. Helps with rotating crops. So number one is knowing where you planted things the year before so that you can rotate your crops. Also, keeping track of your land. Thinking about where you want to plant things. You need to know, where do you have the most sun? Where does the sun travel in your garden plot? So, for example, my garden is in full sun. I don't have any trees back there of my own. I have a few trees along this back fence line that belong to my neighbor. But if my garden is here, with these trees here, my sun is out here in front somewhere. Wait, you can see my finger. It's like my sun is way over here. It's going along this side of the sky. My sun goes, the way my garden is like this. This is the, over here is the east. The sun comes up. We get full sun. We get a little bit of shade from a tree right here first thing in the morning. And then after that, the sun gets a little higher in the sky, maybe by 10 or 11 o'clock actually. The whole garden is completely out of the shadow, including this end of it. And the sun travels along this way. I've got full sun, full sun, full sun, right on until about 4:30, 5 o'clock at night, maybe 6 at night. When the sun gets way over on this side in the west, then there's a tree over here that starts shading the garden this way. Okay, so I only have shade from the neighbor's trees. This side shaded in the morning, and then it gets less and less and less, and then this side shaded in the evening. It gets more and more throughout the evening. And that gives me a lot of sun in my garden. And having it planted this way in the rows like this, as long as I don't put the tallest things, if I put all my tallest crops here and made my rows go this way, then I would have stuff shaded a lot during the day. As the sun went over this way, it would shade everything in the back. So doing it the rows like this, nothing is getting shaded like that. All the same crops are in the same row, so they're getting sun on all sides. It works out really, really nicely for me. So think about where the sun is when you're growing things. Also, like I said, number one, where'd you plant things before? Number two, where's your sun? How does it travel through the sky and how much shade you get? I like putting my cucumbers, zucchinis, and things down here on this side because then it gets that shade in the early morning that keeps those from getting too much sun straight on right away, and then they have sun. And then, it's just nice for them that way. I love the years when, like this year, when my tomatoes get to again be in this middle section because it gets the most sun all day as the very middle of my garden. And so having the tomatoes in there is great. I can't do that every year. Even when they're in other spots, though, they do get a lot of sun, so it works out for me. But the middle section is always where I get the best tomatoes growing. It's awesome. So what I did this year to plan is then I sat down and I look at all of my things I want to grow. I get all my little seed packets out, all my different kinds of stuff, carrots, broccoli, spinach, whatever I'm growing. Write down what I'm having, what I'm growing, so that I know what I need to make space for in the garden. And then I make a little plan like this. And boy, you're going to see how messy this looks. It started out looking really awesome. But now it's been out to the garden with me, back in the house, out to the garden. It's gotten wet, it's gotten dirty, and it's gotten changed a gazillion times, okay? So I did, though, plot out where my rows were going to be, and I even tried to be mathematical about it this year. I tried saying, okay, this is going to be 2 feet in between each row, and each row will be 1.5 feet wide, and 2 feet between the row, 1.5 feet wide. So I tried to do it mathematically to see if I was really excellent and efficient with my space, how many rows could I do? And then I planned out what I would put in each row and how I wanted to start them. And this year I really did want to start my cold crop over here. So this is where I started raking first and getting my rows ready so I could get the cold crop in, and then I could continue working on the rest of the garden because I had more time before I had to get everything else put into the garden. But when I get out there and start putting things in, it doesn't always work the way I plan. And so I move things around. So you'll see lots of scribbling. I'm going to zoom in a little on this. Lots of things have been scribbled out. Arrows going everywhere, different colors, things getting moved over. I was hoping to do 4 rows of tomatoes, but I had to end up putting my okra over here in this row because it wouldn't fit with all of the cabbage and broccoli and stuff I had. I had so many beautiful little seedlings that grew, and I wanted to plant as many of them as I could. So I took one row away that I was going to use for my tomatoes and decided that, I could have a few less tomatoes. It's hard for me, but I'm going to have 4 rows instead of 5 rows of tomatoes. And so that's, the next thing, sitting down, planning it out on paper, how you think it's going to go. I even used some sticky notes this year at the beginning and tried to, so that I could move it around as I went with the sticky notes. But then they were starting to fall off, so I wrote on the paper and I just scribble, move, put arrows, everything. So another thing you can think of when you're planning is if you do want some more shade on something, plant a tall crop next to it. So like the okra gets pretty tall. So if I plant my okra in a row that's right where my cabbage and Brussels sprouts are, that they might want a little more shade, they're better in the colder temperature. It'll give them a little more shade if I put the okra right here because the okra gets pretty tall. And so part of the day, as the sun's over on this side, is going to make the okra shade on top of those plants. You can do that. Same thing with the corn. My corn's going to be over here, off the chart actually. I made a new little plot over here for the corn. It's off the chart. And I can have the corn here, and next to it have the zucchini and squashes, cucumbers. That will give them a little bit more shade at one point of the day. So, you can think of that if you want to get real technical and try to make those kind of plans. That helps too. But my other rule is you get out there and you start raking the rows and it doesn't turn out exactly the way you wanted. I'm not going to go out there with a measuring stick and measure each row as I go. I like a lot of space in between my rows so I can easily get in and out for harvesting, and also I can take my tiller in between the rows to till up weeds as they start coming up when crops are small. So I got out there and started raking the rows up, and I'm not going to have as many rows as I drew on this paper. It's okay. I just need to make adjustments as I go. So if that means I have to adjust and have 1 less row of tomatoes, or if that means I'm going to need to put some more trellises out there to grow some of my squash and zucchini up instead of letting it sprawl all over the ground, I'll work with that and I'll just make it work. So I find that it's best to make a plan and then change your plan and then change it again and change it again as much as you need to until you get all your stuff in the ground the way that you want it. It just gives you a start of planning, and then once you start working, you can adjust the plan and until you get everything in the ground and it all works out. It's good. If you're an imperfect gardener, you don't have to worry about having everything exactly the way you put it on paper. It works the way it works. And if I get to the end and I have leftover plants, I've already been looking out there today. I know I'm going to have leftover plants. And when I'm getting to the end, over here, there's a little space in between where this row is and where the neighbor's fence is here, chain link fence. And I'm thinking, if I had to, and I had like some extra celery or some extra onions or something, I could shove a few things in right there next to the fence, and there might be room for them to grow. And I could cross my fingers that the guys that hope nobody has to come and work on the telephone pole this year. It's right over here. Then maybe if I put some stuff close enough to the fence, some of it could go right there at the fence, and it would just give me a little extra room to throw some things in and not get trampled by anybody coming back to the telephone pole that's right here at the back. I don't know. Just putting things in wherever I can as time goes by. The other thing is I plan it, and I do it this way. I haven't made a lot of plans on planting new things as the summer goes on, but I want to do that this year. And so what I'm thinking is some of my cold crop down here, some of these cold crop things, as some of the lettuce gets done and starts to bolt, and I'm done with that lettuce, I can pull that out, and I could throw in something else that'll be something that grows well towards the end and into the fall. So I'm going to do that as time permits and as things get done, I'll just go, hey, I'm going to throw something else in here. You don't have to have every single thing planned, but it helps to have a start, and then it helps to look at previous years and make sure that you're rotating your crop. And this year, when I get everything done planted, I will, make sure I have it all right on here. But I really usually do end up taking a nice photo and then doing like I did with this photo. I think with this one I might have put a couple of photos together in order to get the spread of the whole garden. But if I get up on my deck, I can pretty much see almost the whole garden from my deck with one photo. Print that out and write what everything is, and it helps me keep track for the next year. And then I file these. I keep these in a file so that next year I have them, and the year after, and I know, like this one was from 3 years ago, and then the one from a couple of years ago was actually online, and I didn't print it out, but I had it in my digital files. But you can look at it each year, make sure you're rotating your crops, and it's a nice way to plan things and figure things out on paper. So that's what I do. I've heard of some apps now that they have. There's a gardening app you can get, and it'll tell you how many things will fit in every foot of your garden and that kind of thing. I don't tend to follow all those guidelines. No, don't tell anyone. I don't follow all the guidelines. I'm trying to get better at it. I'm trying to leave 3 feet between each tomato plant. But it's really hard. Like the Brussels sprouts. It said on Brussels sprouts that you need 24 inches. Let's see, a foot and another foot. 24 inches between each Brussels sprout plant. And when you put them in the ground, they're just tiny, little tiny things. They're small. And so you put it, and then 24 inches, another one, and you're going, I'm wasting all this space. So hard not to put them closer together, and I have to admit that I did. I put the Brussels sprouts about 18 instead of 24 inches apart. And some of the things that say to do 18 inches apart, I do them about a foot apart. I have found that mostly it works, but I've also found that if you overcrowd them too much, you get rotted stuff going on. So do plan to not overcrowd too much. I think you can push the limits a little bit, but when you overcrowd too much, for example, one year when I first started gardening, I did my green beans. I had about a 1.5 foot wide raised bed that I do just with the dirt. I don't use the wood and all that. I just raised up in the dirt. And I did 2 rows of green beans down that. Okay? And what I found was when the green bean plants got big and bushy and beautiful, they were running into each other in the middle. And really, I'd only had like 2 or 3 inches in between each plant as well. They were very bushed together, and as the season went on, they started to get disease. They started to get little spots on the green beans, spots on the flowers. Some of the green beans actually started to mold right on the plant because they were too wet. They couldn't dry all the way after being watered. And so I really have changed how I do the green beans, and I have found that you can have them a little closer than it says, but if you have them too close, it really does affect the foliage not being able to dry well enough. And then with some plants, then it's hard to keep enough nourishment in the ground, like with your tomatoes. You can't keep them nourished good enough if you have too many in one spot, too close together, and you don't get as big of tomatoes growing on there. So follow the guidelines as best you can, but you can push the limit just a little bit is what I found. Push the limit a little, but not too much. I've seen a lot of people try to squish as much as you can into this little small space, and it does affect your crop. It just does. So I'm trying to learn how to follow the guidelines. I still push the limit, but I'm trying to learn, and eventually I will be more perfect at that, I think. So I'm doing what works, though. I do what works for me. And you learn by trying things. Try out something new, experiment, see if it works. If it doesn't work, you're fine. If it does work, great. You can do it again the next year. If it doesn't work, change it up a little bit. One of the things I do with my experiments, though, if I want to try growing something closer together, I might plant some of it exactly the way it says on the package. Follow these guidelines on the back. And then I might try a few of them, doing them a little closer together, so that I know at least I'm going to have some that are going to grow and be beautiful. And then I'll try some of them a little closer, and if it works, I could do it the next year, and if it doesn't work, I've still got the ones I did correctly to use. So that's how I plan my garden each year, and I hope that you have fun planning your garden.